Reese basses are a fundamental sound in so many different genres of electronic music, particularly things like drum and bass, and there are so many different types of Reese bass sounds as well. But in this video, I want to show you how you can create your own classic kind of wobbly, pumping sounding Reese bass using only a few stock instruments and effects inside of Ableton Live. Now, of course, you could use any synthesizer or effects that you want. The techniques are all translatable, but in this video, to keep things simple, I'm going to be using effects and instruments that come in every edition of Ableton Live, so that no matter what edition of Ableton Live you're using, you can follow along with this tutorial. Let's dive right in. So to start off with, here's an example of the sound that we're going to create in this video. So you can hear there that one of the fundamental aspects of this sound is that as we increase in pitch, we get a kind of faster wobble. A decrease in pitch gives us a little bit of a lower wobble. And that is one of the most crucial aspects of this kind of Reese bass sound, but don't worry, it's really, really simple to do. So to create this sound, we're gonna use Ableton Live's Drift. So here I've got a blank MIDI track and I'm gonna open up Drift onto this MIDI track. Then we're just gonna initialize our Drift preset. To do this, I'm gonna pull oscillator 2 all the way down to -infinity dB, set oscillator 1 to 0 dB, pull the sustain of the amplitude envelope all the way up and the release all the way down. Come over to this frequency mod section, remove the modulation from the cutoff frequency of the filter by double clicking on these two sliders right here. And then because this is a bass sound, I'm gonna go ahead and switch the mode here to mono and also turn down drift to 0%. And just because I want every single note to be hitting at exactly the same volume, I'm also gonna go to this vel to vol or velocity to volume slider and pull this all the way down to 0%, which means that the velocity isn't actually going to affect the outgoing volume of any note going through this Drift synthesizer. Okay, so now we've got the setup out of the way, let's get into creating the sound. We're gonna leave oscillator 1 here set to a sawtooth wave, so by default we have it sounding like this. I'm gonna set the output volume of the synthesizer to 0 dB so we get it a little bit louder. And then I'm gonna go ahead and switch oscillator 2 here also to a sawtooth wave, switch the octave up to 0, and then increase the oscillator 2 volume also to 0 dB. And so now we have two sawtooth waves playing at the same time across these two oscillators. And now here's how we get that really classic pumping sound. I'm gonna come to the detune knob of oscillator 2, and I'm just gonna detune this up very slightly to about 0.5 or half a semitone. And as I increase this detune control, have a listen to what happens to the sound. You can hear that as the detune there increases, we get this kind of beating, pumping effect, which is coming from the two oscillators kind of canceling each other out in terms of their phase and re-triggering, and that's what results in this kind of beating or pumping sound, which is a crucial element for this type of Reese bass. Now, there are other ways that you can achieve this effect, for example, using a unison mode on an oscillator or something similar, but I really like this way of doing it, particularly because it results in that kind of old school, super pumpy, buzzy Reese bass sound. Next, we're gonna go ahead and add some effects to really bring this sound to life. The first effect I want to add is a chorus, and this is going to add some stereo width to the sound that is currently missing. Now, if you're using a unison detune mode, you potentially already have some kind of stereo width in the sound, but for this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and add a chorus ensemble device directly after this drift. Now, by default, we have a pretty wide sound. But by leaving this chorus on, we're gonna get a lot of weirder phasing issues, particularly in the low frequencies. So what I'm gonna do is actually go to this low cut or high pass filter option, turn this on and set this to about 100 Hertz. And that means that anything under 100 Hertz is not gonna be output or affected by this chorus. Next, I'm gonna pull the rate all the way down, and then I'm gonna decrease the dry wet to somewhere like 30 to 50% so that we just blend this effect in subtly. And now we have just a little bit of stereo width added to this sound, and we still have a kind of nice, tight, fundamental low frequency. If you want a little bit more width, you can increase this width percentage here. And if you want a little bit more saturation from this sound, you can also increase the warmth control on the chorus. Speaking of saturation, the next effect we're gonna add is actually a saturator. So I'm gonna go ahead and add Ableton Live's saturator here after this chorus ensemble. And then all I'm gonna do is just increase this drive control so that we start to apply some distortion and saturation to the sound. Now, the amount of saturation that you apply will totally depend on the vibe that you wanna go for. In this case, I'm gonna really crank it. You can also play around with different types of saturation as well, but if you do decide to play around with different types of saturation, just make sure you put either a limiter after the saturator or turn this saturator onto either soft clip or hard clip mode so that you stop it from exceeding 0 dB on the output, and that will apply some even more kind of nice crunchy saturation and distortion to the sound as well. Next up, I want to add a little bit more grit to this sound. I'm going to do this by adding some noise. Now there's a few different ways that you can add noise to this sound. The first way is using an effect like Ableton Live's erosion device. So I'm going to go ahead and grab erosion and actually pull this before the chorus. Then I'm going to switch this to the noise mode and then increase the width and slowly bring up the amount slider until I start to hear the amount of noise or kind of grittiness that I want added to this sound. If you don't have access to something like Ableton Live's erosion, although it's available in every single edition of Ableton Live, you can always go back to the initial synthesizer and just increase a noise oscillator here as well. And that will again add that kind of gritty, noisy texture to the sound, which can be really, really cool in a lot of different situations. By the way, if you want to learn more about bass sound design, I actually have an online course called Bass Sound Design Fundamentals for Electronic Music. You can check that out in the link below. It's only 25 Australian dollars and it's an hour and a half full of all the fundamentals you need to know about how to design your own bass sounds for electronic music. From here, there's a whole bunch of different things you could do. You could add things like reverb, phases, or different types of distortion or saturation, but we're going to leave all that for the moment so you can experiment with it yourself. And instead, we're going to take a look at adding some performative aspects to this sound. So to add some performative aspects to this sound, there's a few things we're going to do. First of all, I'm going to come to the Drift synthesizer and I'm going to come down to the bottom right and turn on Legato. And then I'm going to increase the glide control up to maybe 150 to 300 milliseconds. And what this is going to do is mean that overlapping notes are actually going to slide their pitch between one another, which can result in a really, really cool sound. You can play around with different glide times. For example, you could go a really high glide time all the way up to like 1 second. Or you could keep things simple, have a lower glide time, or even automate this throughout different points in your song. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and increase the pitch bend range all the way from 2 semitones up to 12 semitones. And this means that if I send Drift a pitch bend signal, the range of that pitch bend is now going to be either plus 12 semitones or minus 12 semitones, depending on the direction that I push that pitch bend wheel in. To showcase this, I'm gonna add Ableton Live's CC control device before the drift here, and as I increase or decrease this pitch bend control, have a listen to how it affects the sound. Lastly, in terms of performative aspects, I want to be able to kind of control the rate of the beating. To do this, we need some way to control the detune amount of oscillator 2. Now there's different ways you could do this, but to keep things simple, I'm going to control this detune amount here with the mod wheel. To do this in Drift, I'm going to come to the mod section, and then in the first modulation section, I'm going to select mod wheel from the first drop-down menu, which is already there. I'm going to select the oscillator 2 detune from the second drop-down menu, and then I'm going to set the percentage here to only kind of like 5 to 10%. So let's type in 8% here. And now, as I increase the mod wheel on this CC control, take a listen to what happens to the sound. As I increase the mod wheel, we're increasing the detune amount of oscillator 2, which is resulting in a faster beating sound. Now finally, just to add a little bit more accentuation to the beginning of each note, I'm gonna add a pitch envelope that's gonna drop the pitch from really high to really low every time a new note hits. To do this, I'm gonna come to the pitch mod section in the bottom left-hand corner of Drift, increase the envelope 2 modulation all the way to 100%, then come over to envelope 2, pull the sustain all the way down, and now this decay parameter is going to control the length of the pitch drop on the sound every time a new note is triggered. If you'd like to download the sound I made in this video as a preset Ableton Live rack, I'll make it available to my members on my Buy Me a Coffee page. You can become a member by checking the links in the description. Or if you'd like to learn more about bass sound design fundamentals, you can check out my bass sound design fundamentals for electronic music course in the description as well. You can check out this video right here for some more bass sound design tips and tricks. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, stay awesome, and I'll see you all in the next video.